You're welcome to today's episode of Searching the Heart. Today I'll be looking at a very peculiar topic, and that topic is titled How Cults Are Created. Of course, most of us have at one time or the other come across the term cults. We'll be looking at the definition briefly, but before that, we want to see a general context of what constitutes a cult. Definitions have varied over the centuries, and cults, to define a cult is different from defining an occult. Many people have some scholars have drawn divergent definitions of that, and popularly, cults are less harmful as compared to occults, because the occult is involved in spiritual observances and that sometimes may be harmful to human beings and involve, of course, witchcraft. We'll be talking about that, necromancy, over the past episodes of this program. But cults may not be involved in such spiritual rituals or activities, but have a physical organization on ground that have certain rules. And such cults have done history, and some have been mostly harmless, others have been harmful, and that is what has brought the issue of cultism to the fore and being discussed by the society, being seen in the society as something to be concerned about. Today I want to look at some of the context of how cults are created. And historically, when you look at it from the Christian point of view, you will discover that Acts chapter 6 verse 8 gives us, all the way to chapter 9, gives us a very good foundation of understanding how cults are created. And we discover that even from the beginning, the Christian church was considered a cult. Well, of course, you have to also draw out the dichotomy between a sect and a cult. And we must know that, first of all, cults start as sects. Okay? They start as sects, and before they are probably described by others as cults. So it started as a sect of the Jewish faith, and many of the Jews were against this sect. And how did they create this sect, make this sect powerful? In Acts chapter 6 verse 8, we discover that it started through the persecution of the Christians. Notably, we are not even talking about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, but it reached an ebb when one of the disciples of Jesus Christ, called Stephen, was publicly stoned to death after convincingly arguing his case for the teachings of Jesus Christ in a public stage, on a public stage. And this led to his mobbing and execution. We read this in Acts chapter 6 verse 8. And this event was the beginning of the separation of the Christian church from the Jewish people. And it led to the stoppage of Saturday worship and the creation of Sunday worship. Of course, Sunday worship was known as the Lord's Day, and when the day Jesus Christ resurrected, and so it became the accepted day in which Christians worship, as opposed to Saturday, the seventh day, which is the Jewish worship day. So this was the beginning of the separation of the church, the Christian church, from the Jews, effectively creating what they would term as a cult. The church went underground after then and dispersed throughout the Roman Empire. Later on, because of the persecution of the Jews on the church, the Romans took notice of the church. Instead of treating the church as, just that sect within the greater Judaism, they took special notice of the church and also began to persecute the church. This drove the church further underground, and effectively, if you were living in that time, you would call the church a cult. Or, yes, a cult. Because Judaism, in the greater context, had been even driven into the shadows itself. And so the church was on its own. And because of the persecution, it was driven underground and was thought of as a cult. Now, this event did not stop the Romans from persecuting the Jews themselves. And this created a Jewish cult, which in itself was driven into isolation and even into extreme situations of committing suicide, mass suicide. And this is known to happen to cults, has happened to cults, some cults, because they are so alienated from greater society, they are forced into suicide. This is what happened at AD 70 during the rebellion of the Jews against the Romans. So what we see here is the Christian cult that developed at that time, the Jewish nation cult, and these two both prospered and exist up to today. These two ancient cults prosper and still exist today. In fact, the Christian faith is one of the largest religions in the world today. Of course, we know the Jews have undergone further persecution even during the time of Nazi Germany, which was also perpetrated by a cult, the Nazi cult, that took control of the German state and perpetrated the evils known as anti-Semitism against the Jews, and of course the Holocaust, of the Nazi regime of those days. So cults may counter one another. They may one side may be called a cult while the other is not known as a cult, but indeed may be a cult. So these are the things we have to understand about cult. People call organizations cults, but they themselves may be cults. And so we want to really find out who is a cult, what is a cult, and what really is the proper definition of a cult, and how they are formed. Now later on, the Catholic Church became, in itself, we know that the Christian Church prospered, survived through all the persecution, through all the naming, and became the world power. And this led to the creation of the Roman Catholic Church, of course. And this church took over the Roman Empire. And after centuries of prosperous rule, the Catholic Church itself became a cult and persecuted all those who did not accept its doctrines. Though it was the majority, it was the system in power, it did not stop it from deteriorating and becoming a cult. And the leadership became a cult and persecuted other people who did not believe what it believed. And in the process, creating the Templar cult, subcult, known as some people believe that it is the Templar cult, the Knights Templar cult that today has become the Freemasons. I don't know about that. I don't have any facts, but there are people who believe that. And this can also be traced to the Illuminati and all that. We don't know whether that is true. So in the past 100 years, many organizations have also been labeled cults. Now, in the time also of the Roman Catholic leadership that persecuted those who did not believe what he believed, we know that at the time of the Lutheran Reformation, even that Reformation itself was segregated and called a cult, anathema, as it were. So this is what has dotted history. And in the past 100 years, we have seen organizations like the Azusa Street Revivals, named as cults. Herbert W. Armstrong of the Worldwide Church of God also segregated and called a cult. We've had the Seventh-day Adventists also called cults. The Jehovah's Witnesses also described by some people who did not agree with them as a cult. We've had the Rosicrucian Order, and the Olumba. And most notable is the Jesus of Texas. And this person attracted hundreds of people and was involved in a communal suicide in the United States some decades back, because he did not believe in the laws of the state in which he was living, and so was termed as a cult and as a dangerous cult. And so he led his followers into a communal suicide. Of course, this will lead us to what we want to talk about, to one of the issues we want to talk about today. Some of these groups deserve to be named cults, and others did not deserve to be named cults. Now, some of these groups I've mentioned still exist today, and if you ask them, they'll tell you that they are not a cult. I grew up in the Sabbatarian 7-day keeping Worldwide Church of God, led by Herbert Armstrong. And I know that I did not experience anything that led me to say that that group was a cult. And of course, it was one of those churches that up to today we believe had a lot of things right, maybe just one or two wrong, and maybe that was what caused them to be named a cult. But I never experienced anything that caused me to believe that I was being led astray in any way, shape, or form. Of course, my beliefs since then have shifted a bit, but I still know that a lot of things he preached then were right, and today we experience some. I watched a documentary by Al Jazeera just about, I think, a week ago, and they kind of brought out some of those issues, and up to today people struggle with those issues. But I can tell you today that there are things happening today that are far worse than anything you can find in what Armstrong was doing. Okay, so let us continue. We'll now try to bring out a definition of our own. Okay, some of these definitions are from books, and a lot is from real experience as to what is really a cult or an occult. Okay, we need to understand what a cult is and what an occult is. Number one, once you join a group and you are prohibited from leaving, or it is made very difficult for you to leave, that is one of the first signs that this is a cult, possibly an occult. Okay? The difference between a cult and a cult is that the cult is more of a physical, temporal structure, but the occult is deeply involved in spiritual practices and exhibits spiritual power to achieve its aims. Some of that spiritual power may be observed as evil, as very, very deadly. So the occult can be very deadly, while the cult may not be deadly in its activity, may not perpetrate deadly acts in order to achieve its aims. So once you join such a group and you are told that you cannot leave, or it is made very difficult for you to leave, you know that this may be a cult or an occult. Members face restrictions. Number two, Members face restrictions of who they can associate with. Very strict restrictions. Yeah, sometimes you might be in a group and they might say, okay, please, we don't associate with this other group or that other group. But when such restrictions become too strict, in trying to really separate you from others, trying to, bringing in too many rules, too many restrictions, you know that this may be a cult or an occult. And this may lead to the third point, which is that members will be watched and spied on, to make sure that they obey these rules. To make sure they do not associate with those other people, to make sure they are not telling any of the secrets of the organization outside. So members are watched through various means. And when you discover this, whether by tailing, through technology, through networks, human networks, is the same thing. This has begun to become a cult, or it has become a cult. Some organizations don't start as cults, but with time they begin to develop these very harsh tactics, and of course that is the road to becoming a cult. And I want to emphasize that the name cult is an English word, it's a term. You can term it any other thing you want. Some people say secret society. Some people have different names. Gangs. Some of these organizations are gangs, street gangs. They practice such things. Number 4 is that leadership is usually tyrannical. Is very tyrannical, very strict. Not all organizations that are led by one person are cults. Sometimes leadership structure might need that one person leads up to the point that the person retires or dies. Yes, but it is good to have a situation where the person also can be accountable, and maybe to the government of the day or to a board of trustees and all that, and that will be good. But there are many organizations that have just one leader, but that doesn't make them cults or cults. But sometimes, a lot of times, cults answer to one leader and one leader alone. What he says is law, and you cannot question that. There are organizations that look as if they are not cults, but at one point in time or the other, they become cults because one individual takes over, and what he says is he becomes a god in that organization. Number 5, spiritual or physical warfare develops into a key strategy for survival. That is what I tried to say about using weapons, whether spiritual or physical, at all times to get what they want done. Okay? There are other methods of getting what you want, like dialogue, like engagement at so many levels, but when there is an excessive emphasis on spiritual witchcraft or guns, using physical weapons like guns and all that, that has become a cult. It's an occult. So the final point is, sometimes these groups might, when they discover that, when it goes to the extreme, these groups might physically segregate themselves from the generality of the people. They might move to one place or the other. And sometimes this is very popular in nation cults. We have nation cults. There are many countries in the world today, there are nation cults. They are pariahs, as it were. So that is a cult. Many of them, you can name them. Some people consider North Korea as a nation cult. Some people consider even Russia a nation cult. Some people consider countries like, there is one country that is not part of the United Nations. That country is considered a pariah, a cult. And also there are nation cults. And you find that these nation cults are also divided between themselves. They hardly form an association that is united. They are always divided between themselves. That is one very, very important thing to note. They cannot mix with another person. They cannot associate with another. They cannot agree with any other person. That is one issue. And that is how you know this has become a cult. How do you avoid cults? How do we avoid cults? After hearing all these things, I'm sure there are some things going through your mind on how you can avoid a cult. First and foremost, you have to know that not everybody that is called a cult is a cult. Sometimes the person calling the other person a cult may be the cult. So you have to be very careful. So you have to watch out for these things. And one important thing is that no matter what, who is calling who what, you watch for their activities. Do they use very evil methods in achieving their aims? Do they threaten others as a first point of, as a first option in engaging with another person? You know that no matter what they are doing, no matter the kind of diverse leadership they have, this is not a good group. This is a group that will not end well. So you avoid such a group. Okay? Dialogue should be the first point of contact. And the effort should be made to be at peace with the other person. And so, how do you avoid cults? Number one, religion is free will. Religion is free will. Not only religion, ideology is free will. You choose what you believe. Never accept somebody who tries to tell you not to think. Okay, that you must accept what he or she is saying, whether you like it or not. Religion is free will. Number two, reason out your faith to avoid anything that tells you otherwise. Avoid anything that tells you that you should not use your faculties. When you stop using your faculties, you enter a point where you can easily be manipulated. You can be hypnotized easily. You know, you can be brainwashed. So use your head, use your mind, educate yourself, even if you don't have access to education. Insist that, try to learn. Make your mind active. Engage in activities that keep your mind active. And one of the things one of the ways you do so is to avoid necromancy. Avoid necromancy. When you avoid necromancy, that is the first point at which you will avoid entering a cult. Remember, just because you are in the majority does not mean that you are not a cult. I have talked about that already. It is not about number. It is about the principles that guide what you do. Free will, reason, the ability to engage with others without always wanting your own opinion to be first heard. Okay? So just because you are in the majority does not mean that you are not in a cult, or you may not become a cult. Respect the nuclear family. The nuclear family is the smallest unit of society. And if you respect the nuclear family, nobody that does not understand the art of leadership gets involved in marriage. Marriage is one of the first signs that somebody wants to lead and understands leadership. And a marriage that stands, all the better. So respect the nuclear family. Except in the situation where it is a member of the nuclear family that is teaching you things that will lead you into occultism. Okay? Respect the nuclear family because it's very important. It will help you to avoid the desire to join a cult. Most people desire to join cults because they want leadership. They want control. And if you already have learned leadership in the nuclear family, you wouldn't search for those things outside. Many boys join gangs because of that. They don't have fathers who teach them how to take control. how to lead. So they go into cults through the desire to have these things. And this is the problem. They want security. They want protection. So this is what we see in society. Number 5. Remove bad leadership and disunity in your fellowships, churches, organizations. Once you discover that there is an excessive sectarianism within your organization, you know that these are the first signs that a cult is developing within the organization and may lead to the whole organization becoming a cult. When you see too much sectarianism, I just summarize as sectarianism. Excess of sectarianism points to bad leadership, bad leaders within the organization, within the fellowship, and that is the beginning of the creation of an occult or a cult. So many organizations become cults because they are unable to submit to good leadership, and excess of ambition creates cults. And we know that biblical prophecy shows us that at the end time, a majority cult will form. Though it is the majority, it becomes a cult, and then it suppresses the minority. It has happened many times in history. We have named a few times when the church and the Jewish faith were persecuted, segregated by the Roman occult leadership. We've also talked about when the church itself was led by a cult that persecuted the rest of the people, the members of the church. And the Bible prophesies that it will happen again. Some nations are nation cults because, of course, the majority agrees with their philosophy, but it does not stop them from being cults. Okay, many of the tribes we come from are led by cults. Okay, so the end time, a cult will be formed. The false prophet. It is called the false prophet in Revelation chapter 13. Okay, and it will lead the world and persecute again the church. And we are beginning to see the patterns of this thing happening in our generation. A lot of our church leaders look for leadership, create cults, and take over our churches. And people are being stopped from practicing the faith that they know. And this is the time it is ripe for cults to form. Cults are forming all over the world. In Nigeria, in the United States, and in Russia, everywhere. Cults are forming. And they are beginning to, whatever they are doing, you will observe that they are targeting specific groups of people. Okay? We are in a situation also, I don't want to mention this, but for the good of this country, Nigeria, I want to say it, that Nigeria is being segregated to become a cult. It is an international effort. We don't know where it is coming from. I don't know. I've talked about the Illuminati before. Is it coming from the Illuminati? We don't know. But Nigeria is being pushed to the corner so that it becomes a nation cult. And what the leadership does to avoid this, we don't know. We are watching to see. Because economically, Nigeria is being sabotaged. Socially, it is being sabotaged in every direction. And so, we want to see what will happen. China is a nation cult that has succeeded because it has been able to avoid segregation through the wisdom of the leadership. You know, so just because you are a cult doesn't suddenly mean you're going to succeed or you're going to fail. Okay? It takes the wisdom of the leadership to now say, this is where we're going. But submitting to the pressure. Most organizations become a cult because they submit to the pressure. And the pressure is to psychologically defeat you so that you begin to act the way they want. Okay? The Christian faith believes that this is from Satan, the devil himself. Okay? Because he constantly needs sacrifices. That is the belief in the Christian faith. He wants to destroy physically and spiritually, you know. So because you are a nation, that does not, you are not suddenly immune from his strategies. And Nigeria is being pushed into that corner right now. And we have many countries who are in that corner, like North Korea, I've mentioned, so many others. Iran has been in that corner, still is. He's trying to meander that situation. You know, Afghanistan, you know, in Afghanistan is a peculiar situation. Their women are being used against them, so they have submitted to trying to squash the women educationally. And that is what the devil wants. He wants you to bend into his mold, you know. When you begin to do the wrong thing too, you become a cult too. You know, defeat you psychologically. So this is what you should know. Once you discover that they are trying to defeat you psychologically, find ways. And unfortunately, sometimes it is going back to God that is the answer, not going to the same person that is trying to destroy you. So I'm going to continue with this topic in the next podcast. I am David Dunji Chinke in Searching the Heart today.